Hi everyone. While superintelligent AI could solve humanity's biggest challenges, it could also spiral out of our control. Many AI researchers are concerned, especially because the team at OpenAI, tasked with ensuring superintelligent AI safety, has just disbanded. Is it still possible for humanity to achieve alignment? Are international summits on AI safety going to be able to fill the gap? Keep watching to learn more. This video has 3 parts: super alignment team dissolves, corporate self-regulation, and government-led regulation. Part 1. Super alignment team dissolves. You've probably heard the term AI safety, and you might also have heard the term alignment. They're very similar terms. Alignment basically means making sure that a machine has the same values that a human does. The idea is that you can align the values and therefore align the types of reasoning that happen, and also align the types of goals that you get out of the system, which in theory will make sure that the AI remains safe. There's at least 2 types of alignment that are going on right now, and they both get talked about a lot. The first is aligning current models. OpenAI and Google are doing a lot of this at the moment. They're looking at their current foundation models and trying to figure out how to get it to behave more responsibly when you give it certain inputs. It's a very hands-on sort of alignment. The second category is preparing for superintelligence. This is very different because we haven't created superintelligence yet, which would be an AI that's much smarter than a human. But we have already begun to worry about aligning a superintelligent AI. Because if we create something that's much smarter than us, but that has different values and therefore different goals, then it could really clash with humanity very quickly. Here's what OpenAI themselves have to say about superintelligence. Superintelligence will be the most impactful technology humanity has ever invented. But the vast power of superintelligence could also be very dangerous and could lead to the disempowerment of humanity or even human extinction. It might sound like hyperbole when people talk about human extinction coming about because of AI, but actually it's a true existential risk. If there's a superintelligence that has agency to act in the world and has goals that differ from humans, then it can easily use superhuman persuasion abilities to convince various people to get pieces of whatever it needs and eventually construct its own factories and its own robots and leave humanity in the dust. As one of the leaders in the development of the technology that could lead to superintelligence, OpenAI made a commitment back in July 2023. They said they would take 20% of their compute, give it to a team dedicated to figuring out how to align superintelligence, and that they would solve the problem within 4 years. Given that this is an open research problem, and many AI researchers think that it is a very difficult one, completely solving it in 4 years sounds a bit optimistic. So why was OpenAI so confident in their success that they were willing to commit to this? Well, the key is in that 20% compute number. OpenAI has access to a lot of compute, like a lot of GPUs basically, so 20% of that is a huge amount, more than most researchers have access to. Here's a quote from OpenAI's website that describes the approach they were planning to take. "We believe that even without fundamentally new alignment ideas, we can likely build sufficiently aligned AI systems to substantially advance alignment research itself." So basically, they wanted to build an AI scientist and get that AI scientist to solve the rest of the alignment problem. It sounds a little bizarre and maybe very unsafe even to trust an AI to figure out AI alignment. But their approach was basically to use scale. And we've seen time and time again that scaling machine learning techniques tends to produce better results than any human can think of in terms of engineering or hard coding solutions to the problem. The idea being that an AI system that's dedicated to doing AI alignment research wouldn't be general purpose. So even if it became quite powerful, it wouldn't really take over the world in the way that superintelligence would. So this is not a bad idea, really. It might have worked, but it was supposed to take 4 years from July 5th, 2023, and now it's only about 9 months in, and the team has already basically dissolved. The 2 team leads, Ilya Sutskever and Jan Leike, have just quit OpenAI. That's after at least 5 other employees leaving the team since last November. So OpenAI didn't officially dissolve the team, but it's basically disintegrated on its own. And it seems extremely likely that their commitment to solving superintelligence alignment is basically abandoned. I mentioned last November, and what happened in November? Well, that's when OpenAI's board tried to fire Sam Altman. Of course, he quickly clawed his way back into power because he had the backing of a lot of investors. But since Ilya Sutskever was one of the people people that tried to oust Sam Altman, it presumably put him at odds with Sam Altman and kind of isolated him from some of the resources of the company. The other head of alignment, whose actual job title was head of alignment, Jan Leike, said safety culture and processes have taken a back seat to shiny products, and said on Twitter, X, that the team had had trouble getting access to all the compute resources that they needed. Apparently 20% of the compute was being interpreted in different ways. For example, 20% of the compute over 4 years. Does that mean 5% every year? Or maybe 20% of the value at the beginning of the 4-year period? So basically OpenAI started trying to walk back this commitment that it had made internally to give this small team 20% of the company's GPU compute, which is basically like 20% of the company's money. One employee that left OpenAI in April said he had lost confidence that OpenAI would behave responsibly around the time of AGI. So basically, as more and more powerful AI seemed to be within reach, he thought that the company would just start racing ahead and would not really take safety seriously. OpenAI was trying to solve the alignment problem using scale, but they've been growing very quickly and they have a bit of a people problem when it comes to scale. Traditionally, larger companies or even monopolies are actually better at scaling up and executing large tasks smoothly. They have a lot more practice at stability, at hiring, at resource allocation, and commitments. Regardless of what was happening between Ilya and Sam, the company had made a commitment to spend 20% of its compute to try to solve alignment in 4 years. But it seems like there was just too much pressure pushing it in a different direction. So how bad is all of this? It sounds pretty bad, right? Yes, it is pretty bad. OpenAI is probably the foremost frontier model development company. And they had said, don't worry, trust us. We'll solve this alignment problem that everyone's worried about. They had to do something because it's seen as a problem for them and for their image, but they sort of overpromised. They overcommitted in saying that they would be able to tackle this. Keep in mind that this is actually a basic research problem, superintelligence alignment, that's taking place within a for-profit enterprise, because OpenAI is definitely running like a for-profit enterprise now that Microsoft is more closely involved, which means that the incentives were not aligned. We keep talking about alignment between humans and machines in order for them to exist peacefully, but a similar issue was happening within the company's organization itself. The profit motive and the profit incentive was to develop features as quickly as possible and to allocate all of your people and resources and GPU time to making that happen. The only incentive to spending a lot of compute on solving alignment was because they had committed to it publicly, but that didn't seem to bother them too much, and whatever political sway the alignment team had within OpenAI. So it's not really surprising at the end of the day, especially because Sam Altman seemed to have triumphed over a lot of the more safety-minded people back in November. So, is it still possible for this research to be carried out elsewhere, outside of OpenAI? Or is it possible to make sure there's some regulations put into place to make sure that it gets carried out within OpenAI? We'll talk about that more in the next section. Part 2, corporate regulation. Safety has always been an issue for the people that work at OpenAI. They were very conscious about it at the beginning, but nevertheless, Anthropic actually split off of OpenAI over disagreements on how best to approach safety. And keep in mind that having an OpenAI team working on alignment only works out if that team is the fastest in the world at getting towards AGI or superintelligence. In the absence of any coordination between companies and governments, what if some other company develops superintelligence first and they don't pay any attention to whatever OpenAI's alignment team was working on? Even if OpenAI's alignment team is very open about their work and publishes it frequently, which they did pledge to do, one company making sure to put some resources towards alignment doesn't really guarantee safety for humanity. Corporations also have a somewhat strange approach to openness. Openness in terms of open source software or in terms of flexibility for employees. For example, people that work at Google have a lot of perks because it's seen as one of the best companies in the industry. But when Google had a more secure position, Googlers were actually allowed to spend one full day working on a project of their choice. It increased employee happiness, and occasionally Google got something pretty amazing out of these personal projects. So sometimes openness can be a luxury. But in more competitive environments, what tends to happen is that if you're ahead, you close source all of your software, you really lock down on everything so that your secrets don't get out. Whereas when you're behind, you open source everything, you talk a lot about openness in hopes of getting some contributions from the community that will let you catch up to your competitors. openness is just a corporate strategy. Either it's just a form of luxury or it's a form of trying to catch up to your competitors. Nobody actually cares about the concept of being open itself. Or rather, they might care, but they can't act on it because they have too much pressure from their shareholders and their bosses and the corporate environment that they exist in. The long and short of it is that voluntary self-regulation by companies doesn't work. They might make commitments, they might allocate resources towards it, but when the health or the competitiveness of the company is at stake, they'll throw that aside in a heartbeat. They have no incentive to actually do these things that benefit society. No incentive to do them, but incentive to make it look like they're doing them. Capitalism requires everyone to act in their own best interests most of the time. That doesn't mean that coordination is impossible, but it's actually very difficult for coordination to be initiated by one of the players in the game. Everyone will question their motives unless they happen to be the unquestioned dominant player in the market. And then they can force everyone to adopt their standards or follow their practices or whatever. Game theoretically speaking, the only Nash equilibrium is where everybody cheats on their commitments, which is why commitments are never enough and you need laws and regulation instead. Then companies can happily do what is actually the better thing. And there's no internal discussions about, hey, we could cut corners on this instead and we would make more money, because they don't really want to run afoul of regulators and because they know that every one of their competitors is in the same position, having to spend the same amount of resources, having to still comply with those regulations. So who can actually champion alignment? As I mentioned, I don't think companies or industry labs are in the position to do so. Research labs and nonprofits have the incentives, but they generally don't have the compute necessary to keep up with the alignment needs of frontier models. There are some organizations that have been set up to do model compliance evaluation. Biden set something like that up in the United States. These orgs would be given access to models, but probably no access to compute, and they get involved quite late in the process. They're just seen as a checkbox. All compliance is if you work at a company. But there is another group that shows more promise, and that is National AI Safety Labs. Each lab could share research with the other labs from other countries, but not publish things broadly so that they couldn't be accessed by bad actors as easily. They could have access to significant resources if the pockets of the government were deep enough, and regulators could lean on companies to have early access to models as they're being developed. This is actually Yoshua Benyo's idea from some time ago. Basically, decentralize all this research so it's not happening in a single place, in a single AI safety lab, but rather create a network of them all around the world. And luckily, that network of AI safety labs is just getting started. Part 3. Government-led regulation. I think most of us haven't really been paying too much attention to this, but there have been a series of international summits on AI safety, where basically governments from around the world get together, they send their representatives, and the big tech companies send their representatives as well, and they talk a lot and try to figure out things that the governments can do to try to make AI safety better. You might have the conception, especially if you're from the US, that government regulation is slow and doesn't really achieve much. Technology moves much more quickly, and that can be true in certain cases, but what regulation is very good at doing is making sure that companies actually do certain things, especially allocating money towards different problems. Because if they don't do it, then anyone can sue them and they end up paying out way more. Regulation isn't as effective at controlling individuals or small groups, but luckily the major players in AI right now are really big corporations. So the first international summit was hosted by the UK AI Safety Summit. This was last November, and nothing much came out of this except the governments and corporations basically reiterated some of their existing commitments, voluntary commitments. The summit was hosted at Bletchley Park, which at least had some nice symbolism to it, since that's where Alan Turing worked on bombs in World War II. That's bomb with an E on the end, the big code-breaking computers which let the Allies decode all the coded messages that the Germans were sending, including troop movements and that sort of thing. So at Bletchley Park, you had a triumph of democracy and of humans understanding and beating out machines. Like I said, nothing much came out of this summit, but they did plan to have another summit. And that happened in 2024, late May, probably just a few weeks ago, if you're looking at this video soon after it was published. And this second summit was held in South Korea. Well, South Korea in partnership with the UK hosted it, and it was actually a virtual event. So I'm not sure why it was in South Korea, but that's what they say. And they're planning to have a third summit as well, and that one will be hosted by France. So from the two summits that have actually occurred, I think there have been three big outcomes so far. First, a report on AI safety was commissioned at the first summit in the UK. Yoshua Benyo was asked to chair the report, which was basically written by hundreds of scientists from all around the world. It came out about a week before the second summit to give everyone time to read it. Here are a few quotes from the report. This interim international scientific report on the safety of advanced AI finds that the future trajectory of general-purpose AI is remarkably uncertain. The worst outcomes could see the emergence of risks like large-scale unemployment, general-purpose AI-enabled terrorism, or even humanity losing control over general-purpose AI systems. However, nothing about the future of AI is inevitable. How general-purpose AI gets developed and by whom, which problems it gets designed to solve, whether we will be able to reap general-purpose AI's full economic potential, who benefits from it, and the risks that we expose ourselves to, these and many other questions depend on the choices that societies and governments make today and in the future to shape the development of general-purpose AI. I'll probably go through this report in more detail in a future video, but I think these quotes really highlight the thrust of what it's saying. Nothing is set in stone yet, and a lot rests on governments and how they choose to act. The second item to come out of this second summit is a bunch of voluntary commitments. 16 major tech companies, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, big companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, IBM, and also Samsung, Zhipu.ai from China, which is apparently backed by Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi, along with the UAE-based Technology Innovation Institute. So while it's great to get so many companies from all around the world represented there, including companies from regimes that you might think would not come to this sort of event, like from China and from the UAE, these are just voluntary commitments. As someone from the Future of Life Institute said, goodwill alone is not sufficient. And Yoshua Benyo chimed in saying voluntary commitments would have to be accompanied by regulation. And we talked a lot about this in the previous part of this video, so I will go on for now. The third and best outcome from this second AI Safety Summit was an agreement about AI safety institutes. Right now, there aren't really many AI safety institutes in the world. There are AI research institutes, which receive a lot of money from the government. For example, Canada has 3, but they don't explicitly focus on safety, and there's certainly no network between the institutes in different countries. I think the UK was the first to quickly create an AI safety institute after the first summit, and there might be like one other one. But now there's an agreement between 10 countries plus the EU to develop AI safety institutes and to form this network of information exchange between them. The countries include the US, Singapore, Japan, Australia and Canada, and of course, South Korea, since that's where the event was being hosted. You'll notice that it excludes China, but apparently China is being invited in person to South Korea to discuss further. These institutes are going to bring together scientists to share information about AI model risks, capabilities, and limitations. And I found this interesting. The group of institutes will also monitor specific AI safety incidents when they occur, which I guess means that they're going to do a sort of forensic analysis of any accidents or issues that actually arise in the real world, which is a huge step forward. Like I said earlier, I think these government-based AI safety institutes are really the only solution that has any chance of working in the long run. You can't just bet on OpenAI or Google to do the right thing. And even if they did do the right thing, that wouldn't necessarily dissuade their competitor from doing the wrong thing. I think that more has to be done here, however, because if the AI safety institutes are just always playing catch up, that's a really dangerous position to be in. There needs to be additional regulation on the companies themselves to say, put aside this much money for safety research, or integrate the safety researchers' best known techniques as a kind of filter on model outputs, or make models available to any AI safety institute that asks, things like that. The problem is that in cyberspace, attack is always much easier than defense. And in this case, humanity is playing defensive. We have to win every engagement with a potentially hostile rogue AI, because the first time we lose, we face extinction. But I'll dive more into that in another video. Finally, in conclusion, we talked a lot about OpenAI and their commitment to take 20% of their compute and solve the alignment problem within 4 years. That commitment ended up evaporating once all the important people with alignment started leaving the company. And they were only doing that because apparently they weren't receiving the compute that they needed internally. And the goals of the company were taking them in a direction of new products and kind of leaving safety behind in the dust. But this was actually bound to happen because it was corporate self-regulation that led to this commitment in the first place. And it's fine for a company to make that sort of commitment of its resources when it's really far ahead. But once the company starts to feel competition, in this case from Google and many other players, the incentives for OpenAI became to survive, to stay alive, to have the best models, the best capabilities, and they didn't really have the extra resources to spend on AI safety, or at least that seems to have been the reasoning of Sam Altman and the company leadership. So while voluntary self-regulation doesn't really work, if there's actual regulation in place from the governments and reasonably powerful entities that are trying to engage in AI safety research, such as AI safety institutes, then we maybe have a better chance. And fortunately, there have been some AI safety summits recently. First one in the UK, second one in South Korea just a few weeks ago. And from that, we got a commitment from 10 plus countries to develop a network of AI safety institutes to perform exactly the research that we were talking about, that we were all hoping that OpenAI was just going to do for us. So although this news about OpenAI is surely a setback for everybody who's hoping that AI alignment goes well, it's not the end of the world. Literally. Remember, nothing about the future of AI is inevitable. Let's hope that all those folks that left OpenAI find a new position at an AI safety institute where they have access to all the compute that they need to get their research done. And it would be even better if at the third AI safety summit that's going to happen, some regulation was put into place on AI companies to realign their incentives a little bit. Well, we can always hope. If you liked this video, check out this previous one I made about whether we can trust decisions made by AI and how we might know if they're actually good ones. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.